The gun barrel pressed cold against Elena's temple felt like the period at the end of a sentence she'd been writing her whole life, one bad decision at a time, each word her brother's doing, each comma her foolish loyalty. Your brother stole from me. Simon Bruno's voice was silk, wrapped around steel, the kind of sound that made grown men weep before they died. He stood before her in the dim warehouse, backlit by a single hanging bulb that swung gently, casting his shadow, long and monstrous, across oil-stained concrete. $1 million from my family. Elena's knees buckled, but she locked them, refusing to give him the satisfaction. The air smelled of rust and something else. Fear, maybe, or blood from whoever had occupied this space before her. Her brother Danny knelt beside her, face swollen purple, one eye sealed shut, hands zip-tied behind his back. He was sobbing, a wet, pathetic sound that made her want to slap him and hold him simultaneously, the way she'd done since they were children and he'd stolen candy, then cars, then apparently money from the Bruno family. The Bruno family. She'd heard whispers, of course. Everyone in South Brooklyn had. A legacy stretching back centuries to the old country when Mafia meant family and family meant everything. Now it meant men in expensive suits who made people disappear like smoke, leaving behind only rumors and grieving widows who knew better than to ask questions. I didn't know, Danny wheezed through split lips. I swear to God, Simon, I didn't know it was yours. Kane said it was clean. He said, Kane works for me. Simon's words dropped like stones into still water, rippling with implications. Everyone works for me. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears, a tribal drum counting down to execution. She could see the other men positioned around the warehouse perimeter, silent, dark-suited, hands resting casually near concealed weapons. They weren't there to talk. They were there to clean up. The realization crystallized in her chest, sharp and cold as the March wind that had followed her inside. Kill me instead. The words left her mouth before her brain approved them, reckless and raw. I'll take his place. Simon's gaze cut to her, and for the first time, she truly looked at him, saw him. Late 30s, maybe, with the kind of face that belonged on Renaissance paintings of fallen angels. Beautiful and ruined, classical bone structure married to a scar that sliced through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. His eyes were the brown of old whiskey, the kind men drank before making terrible choices. And they were looking at her now with something that wasn't quite curiosity, wasn't quite amusement. You? He moved closer, each step deliberate, until she could smell his cologne, cedar and something darker, like smoke from a fire that never quite went out. What exactly would I do with you? Anything. She heard her voice shake, but push forward anyway. The way she'd push through every impossible thing in her 26 years. Their mother's overdose, their father's abandonment, the endless parade of Danny's disasters that she'd somehow always managed to survive. I'll work for you. I'll do whatever you need. Just don't kill him. Please. Simon tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. His hand came up, and she flinched despite herself, but he only lifted a strand of her dark hair between his fingers, examining it in the swinging light. You know what I am, he said softly. Statement, not question. Yes. You know what happens to people who steal from me. Yes. And you're offering yourself to me anyway, to save this piece of shit who can't even look you in the eye right now. He released her hair, let his hand trail deliberately down the side of her neck. Not quite a caress, not quite a threat. Her skin erupted in goosebumps, and she hated herself for it. Why? He's my brother. As if that explained everything, as if that hadn't been both her blessing and her curse since the day she was born. Something flickered across Simon's face, recognition maybe, or memory, gone before she could name it. He stepped back, clasped his hands behind him in a posture that seemed almost casual, almost safe, except for the deadly stillness in his spine. "Marcus," he said without turning, "what's the going rate for $1 million debt?" A man emerged from the shadows, older than Simon, with silver threading his temples and the air of someone who'd seen everything twice. "With interest? 20 years, give or take, assuming weekly payments and hard labor. And if someone wanted to work it off personally, directly?" Marcus's eyes flicked to Elena, assessment cold and thorough as a medical scan. "Depends on the work." Simon smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever seen. Genuine amusement mixing with something predatory, the way a cat might smile at a particularly entertaining mouse. "You'll be my maid," he told Elena, each word crisp and deliberate. "You'll live in my home, clean my house, serve my meals, and you'll be available to me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for whatever I require. No questions, no refusal, no escape." He paused, letting the words sink in like poison. "Do this for 1 year, and your brother's debt is paid. Refuse, and I put a bullet in his head right now, then one in yours for wasting my time." The warehouse went silent except for Danny's ragged breathing and the creak of the hanging bulbs chain. Elena felt the moment stretch and distort, reality bending around the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She thought of her tiny apartment in Sunset Park, her job at the bakery that barely covered rent, the night classes she'd been taking to maybe, someday, become something more than she was. All of it evaporating like morning fog, burned away by the heat of Simon Bruno's attention. "What about my brother?" She forced her voice steady. "What happens to him?" "He works for me too. Different division. I'll find something appropriately humbling." Simon's smile sharpened. "But you don't get to see him. You don't get to speak to him. He doesn't exist to you anymore. Not until your year is up." Those are the terms." His voice went cold as January ice. "Accept them or watch him die. You have 10 seconds. Elena looked at Danny, really looked at him. This brother she'd sacrificed everything for. This beautiful disaster who'd cost her college and boyfriends and any semblance of a normal life. He met her eyes finally, his one good eye wet with tears, and mouthed, "I'm sorry." As if sorry ever fixed anything, as if sorry brought back time or money or innocence. "I accept," she said, and felt her old life die. Simon gestured, and 2 of his men hauled Danny to his feet, dragged him toward a side exit. Her brother looked back once, face crumpling, but Elena turned away. She couldn't afford grief, couldn't afford doubt, could only afford to survive whatever came next. "Smart girl." Simon's hand settled on her shoulder, proprietary and firm. "Marcus will handle the paperwork. You start tonight." "Tonight? You're mine now, Elena. Didn't anyone tell you?" He leaned close, lips nearly brushing her ear, voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire warehouse, the entire world. "I don't wait for the things I own." The car that drove her away from everything she knew was a black Mercedes with leather seats that smelled like money and danger. Simon sat beside her, silent and still, while Marcus drove through Brooklyn's nighttime streets, past her neighborhood, past the bakery where she'd worked for 3 years, past every familiar landmark until the city transformed into something foreign and cold. They crossed the bridge into Manhattan, wound through streets that grew progressively more exclusive, until they pulled up to a building that looked like it ate smaller buildings for breakfast. 40 stories of glass and steel, doormen in uniforms that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Penthouse, Simon said, first word he'd spoken in 20 minutes. The elevator ride was silent torture, numbers climbing while her stomach dropped, everything inside her screaming to run, even though there was nowhere to run to, no way back from the choice she'd made. The doors opened directly into the apartment. Not a hallway, just straight into a space so enormous she couldn't process it at first. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan's glittering grid, the city spread out like a kingdom at their feet. "Lisa will show you your room." Simon gestured to a middle-aged woman who appeared from a side hallway, her expression carefully neutral. "She'll explain your duties. You start at 6 a.m. It's already past midnight." His smile was brief and cold. "Then I suggest you don't waste time sleeping." Elena followed Lisa through hallways lined with art that probably cost more than most people's houses, past rooms that seemed to exist for no purpose except displaying wealth. Her own room was small, the maid's quarters, obviously, but still nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. Clean white walls, simple furniture, a window overlooking an air shaft, prison with thread count. "He's not as bad as he seems," Lisa said quietly, and Elena almost laughed. Almost. "What does he want from me? Really?" Lisa's face went carefully blank, the expression of someone who'd learned to survive by seeing nothing, saying nothing. "Whatever he wants, honey. That's what you give him. And maybe, if you're lucky, you live through it." She left Elena alone with those words hanging in the air like smoke, like prophecy. Elena sat on the edge of the narrow bed, still wearing her coat, still smelling like the warehouse's rust and fear. Through the thin walls, she could hear sounds of the apartment settling, the hum of expensive appliances, the muffled rhythm of the city 40 floors below, and somewhere in the penthouse, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing. Simon Bruno, walking the halls of his empire at 2 a.m, alone with whatever demons drove a man to build a kingdom on blood and fear. Elena lay back on sheets that smelled like lavender and money, closed her eyes, and tried to remember the last time she'd made a choice that was actually hers. Couldn't. Maybe she never had. Maybe all of life was just choosing which trap to step into, which hand to take before it closed into a fist. Tomorrow she would wake at 6 and learn what it meant to be owned by a man who made people disappear. Tonight she let herself imagine, just for a moment, that somewhere in this gilded prison there might be a door that led to something other than doom. But when she finally slept, she dreamed of gun barrels and swinging lights, of her brother's broken face and Simon Bruno's cold smile. And in the dream, she was falling from those floor-to-ceiling windows, the city rushing up to meet her, beautiful and indifferent and absolutely final. The alarm didn't wake her at 6 a.m. because she never truly slept. Elena splashed cold water on her face in the small attached bathroom, stared at herself in the mirror, same dark eyes, same olive skin, but something fundamental had shifted, like looking at a photograph of someone who used to be you. The black uniform dress Lisa had left hung on the back of the door, simple, expensive, designed to make her invisible while announcing exactly what she'd become. She pulled it on, zipped it up, became the thing she'd agreed to be. The kitchen was already alive when she entered, Lisa moving through it with the efficiency of long practice. Morning light poured through those enormous windows, transforming the apartment from last night's threatening fortress into something almost beautiful, almost believable as a place where normal life happened. Coffee first, Lisa instructed, not unkindly. Mr. Bruno takes it black, exactly 180 degrees, in the blue cup on the left side of the cabinet, not the right side, the left. Bring it to his office at 6:30 exactly, not before, not after. Elena's hands shook slightly as she prepared it, hyper aware of temperature and time, of the stakes attached to every tiny action. At precisely 6:30, she carried the blue cup down the hallway Lisa had indicated, knocked twice on the heavy wooden door. Enter! Simon sat behind a desk that looked like it cost more than a car, wearing reading glasses she hadn't expected, surrounded by papers and multiple computer screens displaying what appeared to be financial data. The morning light caught the silver threading his dark hair, softened the scar on his face just enough to remind her he was human, not just the monster from the warehouse. On the desk, he said, without looking up. She set it down carefully, turned to leave. Stop! Her body obeyed before her mind processed the command. She stood, back to him, feeling his attention on her like heat from a fire. Turn around. She did. He'd removed the glasses now, was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Assessment mixed with something else, curiosity maybe, or calculation. The silence stretched until she wanted to scream just to break it. You barely slept, he observed. I slept enough. Liar. But there was no anger in it, just statement of fact. He stood, moved around the desk with that same deliberate grace she'd noticed in the warehouse, economical, controlled, the movements of someone trained in violence, trying very hard to appear civilized. You're afraid of me. Wouldn't you be? The question surprised them both. His eyebrows lifted fractionally, something that might have been respect flickering across his features. Yes, he admitted. I would be terrified. He picked up the coffee, took a careful sip, eyes never leaving her face. But fear makes people stupid, makes them compliant in ways that get them killed. If you're going to survive here, Elena, you'll need to be smarter than fear. Is that permission to disobey you? It's permission to think. He set the coffee down, crossed his arms, a casual posture that somehow emphasized the width of his shoulders, the coiled strength in his frame. You'll clean the main living spaces daily, laundry on Tuesdays and Fridays. I have dinner meetings here 3 nights a week. You'll serve. Other than that, you stay available and out of sight. He paused, considering. And stay out of my bedroom. Lisa handles that. Relief flooded through her, so strong she almost swayed. Some part of her had been braced for worse, for the inevitable price women paid men like him. The fact that he seemed almost offended by her transparent reaction brought strange color to his cheeks. What did you think I was going to do? His voice had gone soft. Dangerous. Force myself on you? That's not how I operate, Elena. When women come to my bed, they come willingly. The emphasis on the last word carried implications that made heat crawl up her neck. Besides, I'm engaged. She hadn't known that. Somehow that made it worse. Not just a monster, but a monster with a fiancé, playing at normal life while building empires on broken bones. Congratulations, she said flatly. He laughed, brief and genuine, and it transformed his face completely, made him look younger, almost kind, almost human. Then it vanished, shuddered away behind the mask of control. Get to work, he ordered. The days developed a rhythm. strange and surreal. Elena cleaned marble floors that never seemed dirty, organized closets that held enough clothes to outfit a small country, served dinners where men in expensive suits discussed things in coded language while she moved like a ghost, pouring wine and clearing plates and pretending deafness. She learned the apartment's geography: 16 rooms, 4 bathrooms, a library, a gym, a study where Simon spent hours on phone calls in Italian and Russian, languages that sounded like music and threat in equal measure. She learned which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck, where the security cameras watched and where they didn't. She learned Simon, too, in fragments and contradictions. The way he read voraciously philosophy and poetry, not just financial reports. The way he never raised his voice, but could convey fury in the precise placement of a word. The donations she discovered when cleaning his office, cancer research, orphanages, hospitals, enormous sums given anonymously, a killer who saved children, a monster who cried at opera. On her 5th day, she found him at 2 a.m. in the kitchen, sitting in darkness, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with sleep. He looked up when she entered, startled, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Bad dreams?" she asked quietly. "The worst kind." He gestured to the chair across from him. An invitation or command, she couldn't tell. "The ones where you're awake." Elena sat, this woman who'd been taught to fear him, and felt something shift between them. Not quite trust, but maybe recognition. 2 people trapped in lives they hadn't entirely chosen, playing roles that fit poorly. "My father started this empire," Simon said suddenly, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "Built it from nothing, blood and strategy, and when he died, he left it to me, his only son, his heir." The bitterness in his voice could have stripped paint. "I was 19, didn't want it, wanted to study architecture, design buildings instead of bodies." He looked up at her, and in the darkness, his eyes were endless. "But you don't get to choose in this family. You inherit the throne, or you die trying to escape it." "Then why stay?" Elena heard herself ask. "If you hate it so much?" "Because 200 people depend on me for their livelihoods. Because rival families would tear apart everything my father built. Because I'm good at it." Tim smiled without humor. "And because some part of me, the worst part, loves the power, the control, the fear in people's eyes when I walk into a room." "I don't think you love it as much as you pretend." His gaze sharpened. "Careful, Elena. Psychoanalyzing your employer is a good way to lose your job. Or your life. You told me to be smarter than fear. I'm starting to regret that," but there was warmth in it. Almost fondness. He stood, stretched, and she tried not to notice the way his t-shirt pulled across his chest, the vulnerability of him in casual clothes, barefoot in his own kitchen. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow you meet Mia." "Mia?" "My fiancé." He said it flatly, without inflection. "She's curious about the new maid, wants to make sure you're suitable." The way he said it sent warning bells clanging through Elna's skull. She opened her mouth to ask what that meant, but Simon had already left, padding silently back to whatever demons waited in his bedroom. Mia Castellano arrived the next afternoon in a cloud of perfume and barely concealed hostility. She was beautiful in the way expensive things were beautiful, maintained and polished, diamonds at her ears, designer dress clinging to a figure that suggested both personal trainers and possible plastic surgery. Her smile was white and sharp as a knife. "So you're the little charity case," she said, circling Elena like a predator evaluating prey. "Simon does love his strays. Last year, it was a wounded accountant. Year before, some kid from the streets. Her perfectly manicured nail traced Elena's jawline, forced her chin up. Tell me, what special skills do you bring to my fiancé's household? I clean. Elena kept her voice neutral, swallowing rage. That's all. That's all. Mia's laugh was glass breaking. How delightfully modest. She leaned close, lips nearly brushing Elena's ear, voice dropping to a whisper. Let me be very clear, little maid. Simon is mine. Has been since we were children, will be until we're both in the ground. Our families are bound by blood and business. If you think your doe eyes and sad story make you special, you're even stupider than you look. She stepped back, smile returning to social brightness. But please, do stay. I do so enjoy watching girls like you learn exactly how disposable you are. She swept out in another cloud of perfume, leaving Elena shaking with anger and something else. Fear, maybe, but also strange, defiant hope, because Mia's reaction suggested she saw Elena as a threat. And you didn't threaten what couldn't hurt you. That night, serving dinner to Simon and 3 other men whose names she didn't catch, Elena noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when one of them mentioned the Ivanov family. Russians, she gathered, rivals or partners, the line unclear. She poured wine and stayed silent, but her mind was racing, connecting fragments of overheard conversations. Her brother's debt. The name Cain that Danny had mentioned. The way Simon had said, Cain works for me, in a tone that suggested past tense, suggested disposal. Someone had set Danny up, used him to move money, then made sure Simon found out, which meant someone wanted her brother dead, or wanted Simon distracted, or wanted Elena. Simon's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. More wine. She poured, hand steady despite the revelation crystallizing in her mind. She wasn't random collateral damage. She was here for a reason. Someone had orchestrated this, and that someone was still out there, pulling strings, waiting for whatever came next. When the dinner ended and the men left, Simon lingered in the dining room while she cleared plates. The silence felt different now, charged with unspoken questions. Your brother, he said quietly, did he have any connections to Russian families? Any friends or business partners from Brighton Beach? Elena's hand stilled on a wine glass. Why? Because Cain, the man who convinced Danny to steal from me, he was found dead 3 days ago. Single bullet, execution style. Simon's eyes were dark and unreadable. And the signature matches Ivanov family style. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattered on marble, red wine spreading like blood. Elena stared at the wreckage, mind reeling. I didn't know, she whispered. I believe you. Simon moved closer, his presence filling her awareness, crowding out coherent thought. But someone knew, someone wanted your brother to steal from me, wanted me to find out, he stopped, jaw tightening. You need to tell me everything about Danny's friends, his movements, everyone he knew in the past 6 months. Or what? You'll kill him anyway? Or whoever set this up will kill you both just to cover their tracks. His hand came up to her face, thumb brushing her cheek with unexpected gentleness, and she realized she was crying. Talk to me, Elena. Trust me. You put a gun to my head, and you're still alive. His voice dropped, intimate and raw. Do you think that's an accident? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to name. Elena felt the moment crystallize into something dangerous, felt the impossible pull of him. This man who owned her, threatened her, scared her, and somehow made her feel more seen than anyone in her entire life. The intercom buzzed, shattering the moment. Marcus's voice crackled through. "Sir, we have a situation. The council is meeting. They want you. Now." Simon's face went carefully blank, all vulnerability erased behind the mask of control. He stepped back, leaving Elena suddenly cold. "Stay in your room tonight," he ordered. "Don't open the door for anyone. Not Lisa, not Mia, no one." His eyes locked on hers, urgent and fierce. "Do you understand me? Simon, what's happening?" "War," he said simply, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with broken glass and the terrible certainty that everything was about to get so much worse. The gunshot woke her at 3 a.m. Elena bolted upright in darkness, heart hammering, mind struggling to separate dream from reality until the second shot cracked through the night, unmistakable and close. Too close. Somewhere in the apartment, maybe the hallway, maybe right outside her door. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands. No service. Deliberately jammed, she realized with cold terror. The building's alarm should have triggered. Security should have flooded in. But there was only silence, broken by footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving through the penthouse like death on a schedule. Simon had told her to stay in her room, lock the door, wait for him. But Simon had left 7 hours ago and never come back. Elena pressed her ear to the door, hardly breathing. Voices now, low and angry, speaking Russian. She couldn't understand the words, but recognized the cadence, threat and triumph, mixing into something that made her blood run cold. "Where is the girl?" That voice she understood, accented but clear. "I don't know," Lisa's voice, trembling. "Please, I'm just a housekeeper. I don't know anything." The sound of impact, body hitting wall. Lisa's cry of pain. Then footsteps again, moving methodically, room to room, searching, coming closer. Elena looked around her tiny room with the clarity of absolute panic. No weapon, no escape except a window that opened onto 40 stories of nothing. The lock on her door was decorative at best. Wouldn't stop a determined child, let alone armed men hunting her for reasons she didn't fully understand. She did the only thing she could think of, climbed into the narrow closet, buried herself behind uniforms and coats, pulled the door shut, and tried to make her racing heart quiet enough that it wouldn't give her away. The door to her room crashed open. Through the closet's slats she could see them. 3 men, black tactical gear, weapons drawn, professional, military precision, not just thugs but soldiers, the kind Simon kept around him, except these weren't his. "Check everything," the lead one ordered. They tore through her room with methodical violence, overturning mattress, emptying drawers, destroying the small space she'd almost started to think of as hers. Elena bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, willing herself to stillness, to silence, to invisibility. One of them moved toward the closet. His hand reached for the handle. The lights went out. Not just her room, the whole building, sudden and absolute darkness, broken only by the city's glow through windows. Emergency power should have kicked in within seconds. It didn't. "Fuck," the lad man's voice, now uncertain. "Boris, check the..." The sound was wet and final, blade through flesh and into vital things. A body hit the floor, gurgling. "Run," someone whispered in the darkness, but the second man was already moving, weapon up, firing blindly at shadows. The muzzle flash lit the room in strobes, violence rendered in snapshots, nightmare, logic. A figure moving too fast to track, too fluid to be real. Another body down, The third man bolted for the door, got 3 steps before something caught him, pulled him back into darkness, his scream cut off with choked finality. Then silence. Elena stayed frozen in the closet, lungs burning, mind refusing to process what she'd just witnessed. 3 trained men killed in maybe 30 seconds by someone who moved like smoke, like death, like, "Elena?" Simon's voice, quiet and close. "It's safe. You can come out." She didn't move. Couldn't. Her body had locked down. Some primitive part of her brain recognizing that the monster in the darkness was just as dangerous whether he said her name gently or not. "Elena." Closer now, right outside the closet. "I know you're scared. I know what you just saw. But I need you to trust me right now. Can you do that?" "You killed them." Her voice sounded strange, distant. Yes. No excuses. No justification. Just acknowledgement, simple and terrible. "They were going to kill me," she whispered. Yes. The closet door opened carefully, and there he was, backlit by ambient city light, still wearing the suit from dinner but now spattered with dark stains she didn't want to examine closely. His face was expressionless, the mask so complete he barely looked human. "They were sent to take you. Leverage against me. I couldn't allow that." Elena stepped out on legs that felt like water, looked down at the 3 bodies arranged in her tiny room like terrible decorations. She should have been screaming, should have been running, should have been something other than this strange calm that felt like shock wearing a mask. "Where's Lisa?" "Alive. Shaken but alive. I got here in time." Simon's jaw clenched. "Barely." "How did you know?" "Because I've been at war with the Ivanov family for 3 years." He moved to the window, stared out at the city like it held answers. It started over territory, escalated over insult, became personal when Dmitry Ivanov decided I'd killed his brother. He turned back to her, something raw and almost vulnerable crossing his features. "I didn't, but I know who did. And so does he. This," he gestured to the bodies, "this is his way of forcing my hand. Take you, use you to make me confess or surrender, or whatever he thinks will satisfy his need for revenge." "I don't understand. What do I have to do with any of this?" Simon crossed to her in 3 strides, took her face between his hands, and the gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, despite the violence literally surrounding them, that Elena's breath caught. "You've become important to me," he said, each word careful and deliberate, like he was confessing to a crime. "These past 2 weeks, I've watched you navigate this impossible situation with more courage than most of my men show in years. You don't flinch anymore when I enter a room. You ask questions. You push back. He stopped, jaw working, struggling with something. "You're real in a world where everyone around me is either terrified or pretending. And Dmitry noticed. His spies reported it. So now you're a target. Then let me go." Elena's hands came up to cover his, and she couldn't tell if she was pulling away or holding on. "Release me from the contract. Send me somewhere safe. I'll disappear." "You think there's anywhere safe from this?" His laugh was bitter. "The Ivanov family has connections in every city, every country. If I let you go, you'd be dead within a week. Your brother, too." "Danny," she'd almost forgotten him in the chaos. "Is he safe for now? I moved him after Kane turned up dead." Simon's thumbs brushed her cheeks, and Elena realized she was crying again. Silent tears she hadn't noticed, falling. "But Elena, I need to tell you something. About your brother. About why he was really targeted." The way he said it made her stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "Danny didn't accidentally steal from me. He was recruited. specifically targeted by Dmitri's people because of who his sister is. I'm nobody. I'm a bakery worker. You're Elena Volkov. Simon's voice went soft, almost pitying. Your mother changed your name after she left Russia. Changed both your names. But your father, your biological father, was Viktor Volkov, high-ranking member of the Solonsevskaya Bratva before he tried to go legitimate. Move to America, leave the life behind. His hands dropped from her face, but his eyes held her trapped. He testified against Dmitry Ivanov's father 20 years ago. That testimony put Ivan Ivanov in prison, where he died, and Dmitry has spent his entire adult life hunting down everyone connected to Viktor Volkov, making them pay for his father's imprisonment and death. The room tilted. Elena grabbed the edge of the closet door to stay upright, mind reeling through implications, through memories of a father she barely remembered. A tall man with sad eyes who spoke Russian to their mother and English to the children, who disappeared when she was 8 and Danny was 6, leaving only absence and their mother's growing drug dependency. He didn't abandon us, she whispered. He was killed. Car bomb. Ivanov family signature. Simon's face was carved stone, brutal and beautiful and absolutely certain. Your mother hid you both, changed your names, tried to erase any connection. It worked for almost 2 decades. But then Danny, stupid and desperate, got mixed up with the wrong people who happened to be Ivanov scouts. They realized who he was, set him up to steal from me, knowing I'd either kill him or take possession of you both. Either way, Dmitri wins. Either Viktor Volkov's children die, or they end up as leverage against me, forcing a conflict that could destroy my family. Elena slid down the wall, sat hard on the floor among the bodies and the ruins of her small room. Everything she had thought she knew about her life was reshaping, recontextualizing. She wasn't random, wasn't collateral, was legacy and revenge, the final chapter in a story written before she was born. So what happens now? Her voice sounded hollow, defeated. Simon crouched before her, brought himself to her level, and when he spoke, his voice carried something she'd never heard from him before, genuine uncertainty. The council, the 5 families that govern organized crime in this region, they called an emergency meeting tonight, demanded I hand you over to Dmitri, let him have his revenge, end the conflict before it escalates into all-out war that damages everyone's business. He paused, jaw clenching. I refused. You what? I refused. He said it louder now, defiant, like he was still arguing with the shadows of that meeting. I told them you're under my protection, that anyone who touches you answers to me, that if Dmitri wants war over something that happened 20 years ago, then war is what he'll get, but I won't sacrifice innocent people to satisfy his bloodlust. Why? Elena grabbed his suit jacket, bunched the expensive fabric in her fists. Why would you do that? Why would you risk everything for me? Simon's hand came up to cover hers, and his eyes were bottomless, full of things he didn't seem to have words for. Because somewhere in the past 2 weeks, you stopped being a debt and started being a person I couldn't imagine losing, he said roughly. Because you see me, the real me, not the monster or the boss or the heir, but the man who hates what he's become and doesn't know how to be anything else. Because when I'm near you, I remember what it felt like to want something that wasn't power or control or revenge. His other hand touched her face again, cradling it like something precious and breakable. Because I'm falling in love with you and I have no idea what to do about it except keep you alive long enough to figure out if you could ever feel the same. The confession hung between them, impossible and dangerous and completely sincere. Elena stared at this man who'd held a gun to her head 2 weeks ago, who'd killed 3 people in darkness to save her, who ran an empire of violence and somehow found space in his ruined heart for poetry and donation, and the aching hope that maybe redemption was still possible. "You're engaged," she whispered. "An arrangement, a business merger. I don't love Mia, never have. Our families decided when we were children that uniting our houses made strategic sense." His jaw clenched. "But the engagement is binding. Breaking it without council approval means war with the Castellano family, too. I'd be fighting on 2 fronts, destroying everything my father built, getting everyone who depends on me killed, all for me," Elena finished. "For someone you've known 2 weeks, someone who brings you nothing but complications and danger." Yes. Simple. Final. Absolutely certain. She should have told him he was insane. Should have run despite his warnings about Ivanov reach. Should have done anything except what she did, which was pull him closer, close the distance between them, and kiss him like he was oxygen and she'd been drowning her entire life. Simon went still with shock, then responded with an intensity that stole her breath, his hands tangling in her hair, body pressing her against the wall with controlled desperation. The kiss tasted like violence and promise, danger and impossible hope, everything terrible about their situation mixing with the undeniable fact that they fit together like puzzle pieces carved from the same broken stone. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena rested her forehead against his. "This is insane," she whispered. "Completely. We're going to get killed, probably. Your fiancé will destroy me." Without question. Simon's smile was savage and fond and absolutely reckless. "But, God help me, Elena, I haven't felt this alive in 20 years. So if you're willing to risk it, willing to stand with me against the families and the council and everyone who thinks they own us, then I'll burn my entire empire to ashes before I let anyone take you." "Even for me?" She pulled back to look at him properly. "Even knowing what I am, what my father did, the revenge I represent? Especially because of that," his eyes blazed. "You didn't choose your father's sins any more than I chose mine, and I'm done letting dead men's grudges write our stories." He stood, pulled her to her feet, and suddenly he was all business again. The vulnerable moment locked away behind strategy. "We need to move. Dmitri knows his team failed. He'll send more, better ones, or come himself. I have safe houses, resources, people who owe me favors. But we have maybe 6 hours before dawn, before the city wakes up, and this becomes harder. What about my brother? Already being moved. Marcus is handling it." Simon was pulling out his phone, typing rapidly. "By morning, you'll both be somewhere, even I don't know. Insurance against torture or coercion." Elena's mind was still reeling, trying to process the past 30 minutes of revelation and violence and impossible confessions. But underneath the shock, something else was crystallizing. A strange, fierce joy. The realization that for the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her instead of the other way around. "Simon," she said quietly. He looked up from his phone. "Whatever happens next, whatever this costs, thank you for choosing me, for seeing me, for being brave enough to tell the truth, even though it makes everything harder." Something soft and broken crossed his face, quickly hidden. "Save your gratitude until we're both still breathing on the other side of this." But she saw it anyway. The hope, fragile, and new. That maybe they could build something real from the wreckage of their family's violence. That maybe love, however insane and dangerous and completely doomed, was worth fighting for after all. The lights came back on, harsh and sudden, revealing the full extent of the carnage in her small room. Elena looked at the bodies, at the man beside her covered in evidence of what he'd done to protect her, and felt something shift in her chest, not quite acceptance of the violence, but understanding of its necessity, of the impossible calculations he made every day to keep people alive in a world designed for death. "Let's go," Simon said, offering his hand. Elena took it, stepped over bodies and broken furniture, walked out of her small maid's room, and into the vast, uncertain territory of whatever came next. War and love and the terrible, beautiful gamble of trusting someone who could destroy you, choosing to believe that maybe this time the monster would turn out to be human after all. The safe house was actually a brownstone in Park Slope, owned by a grandmother named Rosa who made espresso at 4 a.m. and asked no questions about the blood on Simon's clothes or the shell-shocked girl he deposited in her immaculate guest bedroom. "Sleep," Simon ordered, but sleep was impossible. Elena lay on crisp floral sheets, watching dawn gray the sky through lace curtains, listening to Simon's voice rumble through the floor below. Phone calls in multiple languages, strategy and damage control, the machinery of war grinding into motion. She must have drifted off eventually because she woke to sunlight and the smell of eggs, stumbled downstairs to find Simon at Rosa's kitchen table, laptop open, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. The blood was gone, replaced by fresh clothes, but the exhaustion remained, etched deep into the lines around his eyes. "Danny's secure," he said without preamble, "hidden in a church upstate. Dimitri's people will never find him there. Too many priests, too many witnesses. It's neutral ground." Elena poured coffee with shaking hands, sat across from him. "What about us? We're exposed, vulnerable. I have 20 guards rotating in shifts around this block, but it's temporary at best." He rubbed his eyes, a gesture so human it hurt to witness. "The council meets again tonight. They'll demand I hand you to Dimitri, or they'll withdraw their protection, leave me to face the Ivanovs alone. 5 families against 1. I'd lose. Everyone loyal to me would die." "Then give me to him." Elena kept her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Tell Dimitri I'm willing to face whatever revenge he wants. My father's crimes, my blood, end it. Don't let more people die for me." Simon's hand slammed down on the table hard enough to make the coffee cups jump. "No." "Simon," I said no. He stood abruptly, paced the small kitchen like a caged wolf. "You think I haven't considered it? You think the strategically sound choice isn't obvious? But Elena, if I hand you over, I become the man my father wanted me to be. Someone who treats people as assets, who sacrifices individuals for organizational stability, who makes the hard choices that slowly erase every decent thing inside you until you're just a machine calculating acceptable losses." He turned to face her, and his expression was naked anguish. "I've spent 20 years becoming that man, and these past 2 weeks with you, I've remembered what it felt like to be human. I won't go back, not even if it costs me everything. Even if it costs other people everything?" The question landed like a blow. Simon's face went blank, retreating behind the mask, but she'd seen the flinch, the hit. "The people loyal to me know what they signed up for," he said quietly. "They've benefited from my protection, my money, my power. If they die defending those principles, that's the price of the life they chose. That's a lovely rationalization. Elena stood too, matched his intensity. But we both know it's not that simple. What about Lisa? What about Marcus? What about all the people who work for you because they have families to feed, because they had no other options, because they're trapped in this life the same way I was trapped? She moved closer, forced him to meet her eyes. You want to be different than your father? Then make different choices. Find a third option, because I refuse to let my existence be the reason good people die. There is no third option. You don't understand how the families work. Then explain it to me. She grabbed his jacket, same gesture as the night before, but more desperate now. You said I'm smart, that I see things clearly. So talk to me like a partner instead of a pawn. Tell me what the real problem is. Simon stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Resistance giving way to recognition, the realization that she was right, that he'd been defaulting to old patterns instead of using the intelligence he'd claimed to value in her. The problem is honor, he said finally, sinking back into his chair. Dmitri believes I killed his brother Alexei. If he's wrong, if someone else did it and framed me, then this entire conflict is built on a lie. But in our world, once blood is spilled, honor demands revenge. Even if the truth comes out, even if Dmitri realizes I'm innocent, he's gone too far down this path. Admitting error, backing down, it makes him look weak. And weak leaders get deposed, killed by their own people. So he has to destroy you even if he learns the truth. Exactly. Simon's smile was bitter. Unless what? He looked up at her, and something in his eyes made her pulse quicken. Calculation mixing with hope. The expression of a man who'd just seen a move on the chessboard no one else had noticed. Unless we give him something more valuable than revenge, Simon said slowly. A way to save face while ending the conflict. A prize so significant that backing down becomes strategy instead of weakness. What kind of prize? Simon stood, moved to the window, stared out at the quiet Brooklyn street, bathed in morning light. My engagement to Mia isn't just personal, it's political. The Castellano family controls the ports, the shipping lanes, access to international routes that make global trafficking possible. They're the key to everyone's wealth. My marriage to Mia was supposed to cement that alliance, give the Castellano family a direct line to the council through me. He turned back, face carved from stone. But if I broke that engagement, the Castellanos would be furious. They demand compensation, either financial or political. And if the compensation they received was... He paused, jaw clenching. If they received an alliance with the Ivanovs instead, mediated through neutral parties, giving them access to Russian networks and European markets, that would be worth more than my marriage to Mia. Elena's mind raced through implications. You're talking about restructuring family alliances. I'm talking about creating a new power structure that benefits everyone except me, Simon corrected. The Castellanos get Russian connections. The Ivanovs get legitimacy and council approval. The other families get stability and expanded markets. And he laughed without humor. I lose my engagement, my primary alliance, my position of strength on the council. I'd be diminished, weakened, but alive. You'd be alive. Danny would be alive. The war would end, but you'd be vulnerable. Elena moved to him, tried to read the calculation behind his exhaustion. Other families would circle, test your defenses. You could lose everything your father built. Yes, simple, final. The same certainty he'd shown the night before when risking everything to save her. Elena felt something crack open in her chest, terrifying and tender. This man who'd threatened to kill her brother, who ruled through violence and fear, was willing to sacrifice his empire, his power, everything he'd been raised to protect, for her, for the possibility of being something other than the monster his legacy demanded. "There's a problem," she said quietly. "Several, actually. Dmitri won't accept this unless he believes it's real, that you're genuinely weakened, that breaking your engagement isn't some strategic play." Elena's mind was working now, fitting pieces together the way she'd learned to do in those late-night conversations with Simon when he'd talked strategy, and she'd listened, absorbing the brutal logic of his world. He'll think it's a trap unless there's a reason, a public, undeniable reason, why you destroy your own position. Simon's eyes locked on hers, understanding and dawning. "Unless I did it for love." The word hung between them, dangerous and impossibly fragile. "If the families believed you broke your engagement for me," Elena continued, voice barely above a whisper, "a maid, a nobody, Viktor Volkov's daughter, it would look like a weakness, like you'd lost control, let emotion override strategy. Dmitri would believe it because it makes you look foolish, diminished. The other families would accept the restructuring because they'd think you're compromised, easier to manipulate going forward. And I'd have to actually do it." Simon moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small kitchen. Not pretend, not strategize in private while maintaining appearances. "I'd have to publicly claim you, break my engagement to Mia in front of the council, accept the political consequences, and trust that Dmitri values the new alliances more than my destruction. It's insane. Completely." His hand came up to her face, the gesture becoming familiar now. This man who'd learned to touch her like she was something precious instead of property. But no more insane than falling in love with you in the first place. No more insane than choosing humanity over empire. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "The question is, are you willing to stand beside me through this? To become the most hated woman in 5 crime families, blamed for my downfall, targeted by everyone who loses power when I fall? Because Elena, if we do this, there's no going back. Your life will never be quiet or safe or normal. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours, and we'll spend the rest of our lives defending that choice against people who want us dead." Elena thought of her small apartment in Sunset Park, her bakery job, the quiet, anonymous life she'd lived before Danny's stupidity thrust her into Simon's world. Thought of the woman she'd been 2 weeks ago, careful, cautious, playing small to stay safe. That woman was gone, burned away in warehouse threats and midnight confessions, in the discovery of a father she barely remembered and a legacy written in blood. "I'm already targeted," she said, "already hated, already trapped in this world, whether I want to be or not." She covered his hand with hers, held his gaze. "The only question is whether I'm trapped alone or trapped with you and Simon. These past 2 weeks, even terrified, even grieving my old life, even knowing how dangerous you are, I've felt more alive, more seen, more real than I ever did being safe." She rose on her toes, brought her face close to his. "So, yes, I'll stand beside you. I'll be the weapon they use against you and the reason you survived it. I'll choose this insane, dangerous love if you're brave enough to choose it too." Simon kissed her like she was oxygen, like she was redemption, like she was the answer to every question he'd been too afraid to ask. The kiss was different from the night before. Slower, deeper, layered with decision and consequence, and the absolute certainty that they were stepping off a cliff together. No guarantee of anything except the falling. When they broke apart, Simon rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "Tonight," he said, "the council meets at 8. I'll tell them everything. About us, about my decision, about the new alliance structure. Dmitri will be there. Mia will be there. Every family head will be there to witness either my salvation or my execution." His eyes were dark and steady. "Stay here with Rosa. If something goes wrong, if I don't come back, she has instructions. Money, documents, a way out of the country for you and Danny." "No." Elena's grip on him tightened. "If you're walking into that room to fight for us, I'm going with you. They need to see me, see that I'm real, that this isn't strategy but truth. Otherwise, they'll never believe it. Elena, these men are dangerous. So are you." She smiled, fierce and reckless. "And so, apparently am I. My father testified against the Bratva. My mother survived by hiding us for 18 years. I have their blood, their courage. I'm not hiding anymore, Simon. We do this together or not at all." He stared at her for a long moment, then laughed, genuine and surprised and full of something that looked like joy breaking through exhaustion. "God, I love you," he said. "You terrifying, brilliant, stubborn woman." "I love you too," Elena replied, and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. "You beautiful, broken, impossible man." They spent the day preparing. Simon making calls, arranging pieces on a board. Elena was only beginning to understand. She learned that Marcus had been his father's closest friend, that Lisa had been with the family for 30 years, that the council was 5 family heads who met quarterly to prevent exactly the kind of war they were now facing. She learned that Mia's father, Vincent Castellano, was the oldest and most traditional of the heads, that Dmitri Ivanov had inherited his position at 25 after his father's prison death, that alliances in this world were built on mutual profit and dissolved just as quickly when the math changed. She also learned about her own father, not from Simon, but from files Marcus brought, photocopies of old testimony, newspaper clippings, photographs of a man who looked like Danny, who had her eyes. Viktor Volkov had been a true believer in the Bratva's old codes, the thieves' honor that supposedly governed their world. When Ivan Ivanov started trafficking children, breaking the oldest, most sacred code, Viktor had testified, risking everything to stop it. The Bratva had fractured over it, traditionalists versus profiteers, and Viktor had fled to America with his family before the war consumed him. He was brave, Simon said quietly, watching her read. Foolish, maybe, but brave. You come by it honestly. At 7:30, they left Rosa's brownstone in a convoy of 3 black SUVs, surrounded by Simon's most trusted guards. Elena wore a simple black dress Simon had somehow procured, elegant but not expensive, the visual representation of what she was, an outsider, inappropriate, the woman who shouldn't matter, but somehow did. The council met in a private room at a restaurant in Little Italy, the kind of place tourists walked past without noticing, where the real business of the city had been conducted for 100 years. Simon's hand found hers in the car, squeezed once, reassurance or goodbye, she couldn't tell. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "remember that I chose this. That loving you is the only good thing I've done in 20 years. That if I die tonight, I die human instead of monster." "You're not going to die." Elena said it like a command, like she could bend reality through sheer will. "We'll see." They walked through the restaurant's front door together, and Elena felt every eye turn to assess. calculate, judge. She lifted her chin, squeezed Simon's hand back, and followed him into the private room where 5 men sat around, a table laden with untouched food, power and wealth in human form, each one capable of ordering deaths with a nod. Dmitry Ivanov was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s with ice-blue eyes and the kind of cold beauty that suggested cruelty beneath. Vincent Castellano was gray-haired and impeccably dressed, his disappointment in Simon visible in every line of his face. The other 3 heads she didn't recognize, but their expressions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. And Mia sat beside her father, diamonds at her throat, perfect face twisted with barely contained rage. "Simon," Vincent said, voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "You requested this emergency session. The council is listening." Simon pulled out a chair for Elena first, a gesture that earned raised eyebrows and Mia's sharp intake of breath, then sat beside her, facing the 5 most powerful criminals in the Northeast, with the calm of a man who'd already accepted whatever came next. "Gentlemen," he began, and his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction, "I've come to end a war, restructure our alliances, and claim the woman I love, even if it costs me everything you taught me to value." The room went silent. And then, in the terrible, beautiful space of that silence, the real battle began. Vincent Castellano spoke first, his voice cutting through tension like a blade through silk. "You bring your maid to a council meeting and speak of love? Simon, I've known you since you were a boy. Your father would be ashamed." "My father," Simon replied evenly, "built an empire on fear and died alone, hated by everyone who knew him. If that's the legacy you're defending, Vincent, then yes, I imagine he would be ashamed of what I'm about to do." Mia stood abruptly, chair scraping against hardwood. "You're breaking our engagement. For her." The contempt in her voice could have stripped paint. "For Viktor Volkov's daughter, the girl whose father destroyed Ivan Ivanov's life, who's been planted in your house as bait by me." Dmitri's voice was cold water over fire, stopping Mia mid-sentence. He leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with those ice-blue eyes like she was a specimen under glass. "Though bait suggests she knew her role. Looking at her now, I'd say Simon's pet is genuinely ignorant of how thoroughly she's been used." His smile was beautiful and terrible. "Tell me, Miss Volkov, did you really think your brother's death was coincidence? That Kane just happened to recruit him? That you ending up in Simon Bruno's household was anything other than my design?" The words hit Elena like physical blows, but she forced herself to hold his gaze, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I know exactly what I am," she said quietly. "A tool, a weapon, legacy and revenge. But knowing doesn't change the fact that I'm also a person. And so was my father, and your vendetta against dead men has already cost too many lives." "Your father," Dmitri said softly, dangerously, "testified against mine. Put him in a cage where he was beaten, starved, denied medical care for the cancer eating through his lungs. I was 17 when they let me see him for the last time, and he didn't recognize me, too far gone, too destroyed by what Viktor Volkov's testimony did to him." He stood now, moved around the table with predatory grace. "So forgive me if I don't weep for the too many lives lost in pursuit of justice my father never received." "Your father," Elena countered, voice shaking but steady, "was trafficking children, violating every code the Bratva supposedly held sacred. My father testified to stop that, to save lives, to honor the principles your father abandoned the moment profit mattered more than honor. The slap came fast, Dimitri's hand connecting with her cheek hard enough to snap her head sideways. Elena tasted blood, felt Simon surge to his feet beside her, heard the unmistakable sound of multiple weapons being drawn. "Enough!" Vincent's command froze the room. "Dimitri, control yourself. Simon, sit down before this becomes a bloodbath." He waited until both men grudgingly complied. Tension so thick Elena could barely breathe through it. "We're here for solutions, not theater. Simon, you have 5 minutes to explain why the council should accept whatever insanity you're proposing instead of simply letting the Ivanovs have their revenge and ending this disruption to business." Simon's hand found Elena's under the table, squeezed once, grounding them both. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute clarity. The strategist she'd glimpsed in those late-night conversations now fully deployed. "The conflict between the Bruno and Ivanov families has cost everyone at this table money, stability, and leverage," he began. "Every shootout brings police attention. Every body brings federal investigations. Every day this continues, our collective power erodes while law enforcement circles closer." He looked at each council member in turn. "You want it ended. I want it ended. Even Dimitri, if he's honest, knows this vendetta is destroying more than it's avenging." "Get to the point," one of the other heads growled. "I'm proposing a restructuring. I break my engagement to Mia, freeing the Castellano family from an alliance that's become politically complicated. In exchange, Vincent negotiates a new partnership with the Ivanovs. Port access for Russian networks, European connections for American operations, a merger that makes both families more powerful than either could be alone." Simon's jaw clenched. The Bruno family steps back, accepts diminished position on the council, and Dimitri gets what he really wants. Not my death, but my humiliation. Watching me fall from my father's legacy, weakened and exposed, choosing love over power like a fool. "And what," Dimitri asked softly, "stops me from simply taking this deal and killing you both afterward? Getting revenge and political advantage?" "Because the deal is contingent on our survival." Simon pulled a folder from inside his jacket, slid it across the table to Vincent. "I've prepared documents, confessions, financial records, names and dates of operations that would destroy every family at this table if released to federal authorities. They're currently held by a lawyer with instructions to publish if either Elena or I die by anything other than verified natural causes." He smiled without humor. "Mutually assured destruction, the nuclear option. You can have the alliance or you can have revenge, Dimitri, but you can't have both." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena watched calculations play across 5 faces: anger, respect, frustration, and something that might have been admiration mixing with the realization that Simon had outmaneuvered them all. "You're bluffing," Mia said flatly. "You'd never expose your own family's crimes." "Try me." Simon's voice went cold as winter ice. "I've spent 20 years protecting an empire I never wanted, becoming a man I hate, sacrificing every decent impulse to preserve my father's legacy." But Elena reminded me that legacy is just another word for prison. "So yes, Mia, I'll burn it all down. Gladly. Completely. Because the only thing I care about preserving anymore is the woman beside me and the possibility that we can build something real from the ashes of our father's failures." Vincent studied the documents, face unreadable. Then he looked up at his daughter, and Elena saw something shift in his expression. Not quite sympathy, but understanding, the recognition of a cage Mia had also never chosen. "My daughter deserves better than a man whose heart belongs elsewhere," Vincent said quietly. "The engagement is broken, with my blessing. Mia's face went white, then red, fury and humiliation warring across her perfect features. Father, you can't. I can, and I am. Vincent's voice was gentle, but implacable. Dmitri, what say you? Alliance with my family, new markets, expanded power, in exchange for letting Simon and the Volkov girl live their diminished little life in peace. Dmitri stood, moved to where Elena sat, leaned down until his face was inches from hers. She could smell his cologne, see the rage and calculation in his ice blue eyes, feel the weight of his father's ghost pressing down on both of them. You look like him, Dmitri whispered. Victor? Same eyes, same stubborn set to your jaw. His hand came up, not striking this time, but almost gentle, touching the cheek he'd slapped moments before. My father died calling for his children, died alone and broken because of what yours did. And you want me to let that go? To choose profit over honor? I want you to choose life over death. Elena heard her voice shake, but pushed forward anyway. To break the cycle that's consumed both our families, to let us both be something other than our father's revenge. She covered his hand with hers, risky and reckless. Your father's gone, mine too, but we're still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing differently. Doesn't that matter more than blood debts that can never be repaid? Something cracked in Dmitri's expression, grief breaking through rage, the lost boy visible beneath the mob boss. He pulled his hand away, like she'd burned him, stepped back, and Elena saw him struggling, genuinely torn between the revenge he'd built his identity around and the acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, there could be another way. The alliance, Dmitri said finally, voice rough. I accept the alliance. The Volkov girl and Bruno live. But Simon, you're off the council. Your family's vote goes to Castellano. Your territory in Brooklyn gets reassigned. You keep your life and your woman and whatever scraps of empire we leave you. But you're diminished. Powerless, a cautionary tale about what happens when men let emotion override strategy. He smiled sharp and cruel. That's the deal. Take it, or I walk out of here and this war continues until one of us is dead. Simon looked at Elena, question in his eyes. Is this enough? Is survival without power worth it? She nodded, barely perceptible, and felt relief flood through her at the answering acceptance in his face. I accept, Simon said. Then we have an accord. Vincent stood, gestured to the others. The council will draft formal documents tonight. Simon, you have 48 hours to transition your council seat and reassign territories. Dmitri, your family and mine will meet next week to formalize our new partnership. He paused, looking between Simon and Elena with something almost like kindness. You've bought your freedom at considerable cost. I suggest you use it wisely. The meeting dissolved into logistics and legal discussions that Elena barely followed, her mind reeling from adrenaline and relief and the surreal reality that they'd somehow survived. Simon's hand stayed locked with hers under the table, anchor in chaos, proof that this was real. Mia approached as others filed out, her perfect face a mask of controlled fury. You'll regret this, she told Simon quietly. Both of you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually you'll realize what you gave up. And for what? A maid who'll grow bored when the novelty wears off? A girl who doesn't understand your world and never will? She leaned close, voice dropping to a whisper. I would have stood beside you through anything, Simon. Built empire instead of dismantling it. But you chose weakness, and weakness, in our world, is eventually fatal. Maybe, Simon replied, or maybe I chose the only kind of strength that matters, the courage to be human instead of legacy. He stood, brought Elena to her feet beside him. I'm sorry, Mia. You deserved better than an arranged marriage to a man who could never love you. I hope you find that someday. Mia's laugh was glass-breaking. Love, such a pretty word for suicide. She swept past them, diamonds catching light, leaving only the scent of expensive perfume and buried grief. Dmitri was the last to leave, pausing at the door to look back at Elena. Your father was brave, he said quietly. Foolish, but brave. I hated him for it. Still do, probably. But, he stopped, jaw clenching. Tell your brother. Danny, yes, tell him his debt is paid. Viktor Volkov's children are under peace accord now. No one touches you without violating council law. His ice blue eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw not the mob boss, but the 17-year-old boy who'd watched his father die. We're even. Finally. Try not to waste it. Then he was gone, leaving Elena and Simon alone in the private room with ruins of a meal no one had eaten and the impossible weightless feeling of people who'd bet everything and somehow won. Simon pulled her into his arms, held her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. We're alive, he whispered, voice breaking. God, Elena, we're actually alive. She pulled back to look at him, this man who'd given up empire for her, whose face was wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. What now? Now? Simon laughed, shaky and real. Now we figure out who we are when we're not defined by other people's violence. We find Danny, make sure he's actually okay. We get married probably, if you'll have me, because I'm not letting you go after all this. His hand cupped her face, gentle and reverent. We buy a small house somewhere. Maybe I finally study architecture like I wanted when I was 19. Maybe you go to college, become whatever you would have been if your father's choices hadn't shaped your life. Maybe we're boring and normal and safe, and maybe that's the greatest rebellion of all. That sounds perfect, Elena said. Terrifying and impossible and perfect. They left the restaurant together, stepping out into Little Italy's nighttime crowds, tourists and locals mixing, ordinary people living ordinary lives, completely unaware of the wars fought and ended in rooms they walked past without noticing. Simon's guards flanked them, but looser now, less urgent, the crisis atmosphere dissolving into something almost like peace. In the car back to Rosa's, Simon made calls to Marcus, arranging Danny's release and transport, to Lisa, checking on her injuries and promising better protection, to lawyers and accountants, beginning the complex work of dismantling parts of an empire while preserving enough to live on. Elena watched him work, this man who'd transformed from monster to human right before her eyes, and felt the future unfurling, uncertain and fragile, and absolutely worth fighting for. They picked up Danny from the church 3 days later. Her brother looked thin, haunted, marked by his brush with the violence their father's choices had set in motion. He hugged Elena so tight her ribs ached, sobbing apologies she'd heard 1,000 times before. But this time, when he pulled back, she saw something different in his eyes, not just regret but recognition, the beginning of accountability. I'm done, Danny said quietly. No more schemes, no more shortcuts. I'll work for Simon legitimately, earn back what I cost you, become someone you can actually be proud of. He looked at Simon, whose hand rested protectively on Elena's shoulder. Thank you for saving her, for saving me, for being better than I deserved. Be better than you were, Simon replied. That's payment enough. They bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, not far from where Elena had grown up, but worlds away from the person she'd been. Simon enrolled in architecture courses at Columbia, showed up to class like any other middle-aged student pursuing a deferred dream. Elena started college too, psychology, fascinated by the question of how people became who they were, how cycles of violence could be broken, how love could exist in spaces designed for hate. Marcus and Lisa came with them, choosing loyalty over power, helping them build this small, strange life. Danny worked construction, came to dinner every Sunday, slowly rebuilding himself into someone capable of carrying his own weight. And Simon and Elena learned each other in slower time, not the compressed intensity of crisis, but the deeper intimacy of ordinary days. Morning coffee and shared silences, arguments about dishes and money and whose turn it was to call Danny when he inevitably needed something. The way Simon woke screaming sometimes from nightmares of his father, and Elena held him until the shaking stopped. The way she still flinched at sudden movements, and he gave her space to remember she was safe now, that the cage had opened even if instinct hadn't caught up. They married in a small ceremony at the same church that had sheltered Danny, with Rosa and Marcus and Lisa and Danny as witnesses. No family heads or political alliances, just two people choosing each other in defiance of every legacy that said they shouldn't exist. On their wedding night, in the bedroom of their modest brownstone, Simon traced the curve of Elena's face in the lamplight and said, "Tell me this is real, that we actually survived, that I get to keep you. You get to keep me," Elena promised. "And I get to keep you, not because of contracts or debts or family obligations, but because we chose this. Every day, we choose this." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning the geography of each other's bodies, the way they'd learn the geography of each other's damage, with patience and care and the understanding that some scars never fully healed, but could be held, gently honored instead of hidden. Afterward, Elena lay in his arms listening to his heartbeat and thought about her father, Victor, who'd chosen honor over safety and paid with his life, about Simon's father, who'd chosen power over humanity and died alone, about the children they might have someday and the legacies they'd pass on. Not violence or revenge, but the radical choice to love anyway, to forgive anyway, to believe that people could be more than the worst things their families had done. "Do you regret it?" she asked into the darkness. "Giving up the council seat, the power, everything your father built?" Simon was quiet for a long moment, considering. "No," he said finally. "I regret the years I spent being someone I hated. I regret not finding you sooner. I regret every choice I made before I learned that empire was just another word for prison." He pulled her closer, pressed a kiss to her hair. "But this, you, the life we're building, this is the only thing I've done that I'll never regret." Years later, 5, then 10, then 20, they'd tell the story to grandchildren, carefully edited, translated into fairy tale language. Once there was a mafia boss who fell in love with his maid, and they chose each other over kingdoms, love over power, hope over the cycles of violence that had consumed generations. The grandchildren would ask if it was real, if people could really change like that, if love was actually strong enough to break blood debts and family curses. And Elena would look at Simon, older now, gray threading his hair, the scar on his face faded but visible, architect's blueprints spread across their kitchen table, and say, "Yes, it's real, because every day we make it real. Every time we choose gentleness over cruelty, forgiveness over revenge, each other over the easier path, that's when the fairy tale becomes truth." Simon would add, "But it's not magic, it's work, choosing humanity when legacy demands monsters, That's the hardest, most important work there is. And watching their grandchildren run off to play, legacy transformed, cycles broken, Elena and Simon would sit together in the brownstone they'd built from the ruins of empire and know that they'd won the only victory that mattered. Not power or revenge or even survival, but the radical, dangerous, absolutely redemptive choice to love anyway, despite everything, until love became the only legacy worth leaving behind.